Captain Elias Drake moved quietly through the ruins of the city. The air was thick with smoke and dust, the remains of buildings jagged and broken. The war with the Xeraxians had left this place unrecognizable. Once it had been a bustling urban center, full of life and trade. But now, only the echoes of destruction remained. Elias's boots crunched over shards of metal and glass as he scanned the streets for signs of danger. Every shadow could hide a threat. He had been sent here on a reconnaissance mission, but after the last attack, things had gone horribly wrong. His unit was scattered, and he was alone. Despite the danger, he moved with purpose. Elias was a soldier trained for situations like this. But today his focus was different. Among the ruins, he noticed something unusual. A small figure crouched beside the remains of a collapsed building. The figure was motionless, but there was no mistaking the soft sound of breathing. Elias approached slowly, keeping his weapon ready. As he drew closer, he saw the child clearly for the first time. She looked no older than 6. Her clothes were torn, and her face was streaked with dirt and tears. Her large eyes were wide with fear, and she pressed herself against the wall as if hiding from the world itself. Elias lowered his weapon slightly, though he remained cautious. He had faced many enemies in his life, but something about this child made him hesitate. "Hey," he said softly, his voice calm. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The child flinched at the sound, but she didn't run. She just watched him, unsure what to make of this stranger in a uniform she had probably been taught to fear. Elias could see the wounds on her arms and legs. She had been injured in the chaos, and it was clear she could not move very far on her own. He took another careful step forward. "My name is Elias. I'm here to help," he said. Slowly, he extended his hand, showing her that he meant no harm. For a long moment, she did not move. Then, finally, she crawled toward him, her small hands shaking. Elias gently lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, almost fragile. Her body trembled against his chest, and he realized just how little protection she had in this world. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said. "Can you walk if I carry you partway?" The girl shook her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. Elias understood. He would carry her. He adjusted his grip and moved carefully through the ruins. Every step was deliberate, watching for signs of enemy patrols. The Xeraxians were ruthless and would not hesitate to harm a human, let alone a child. Elias's heart beat faster, but he forced himself to remain calm. Panic would only make them easier to find. After a short distance, he found a small alley that offered some cover. He set the child down gently, kneeling beside her. "Do you have a name?" he asked. The girl looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "Tessa." "Tessa," Elias repeated softly. "That's a good name. You're safe now. I'll make sure nothing happens to you." Her eyes filled with tears again, but there was a small flicker of trust. Elias gave her a reassuring smile. He knew that trust would be fragile in this place, but it was a start. He checked the area carefully. The city was mostly deserted, but there were signs that enemy patrols could pass through at any moment. He needed to move quickly. Tessa would not survive alone, and if he delayed, it could cost both of them their lives. Elias decided to take her to a nearby building that had somehow survived the destruction. It was partially intact and could provide some shelter. Moving quietly, he carried her inside. The interior was dark and smelled of dust and decay, but it offered protection from the open streets. He placed Tessa down on a pile of rubble that formed a makeshift seat. "Stay here," he instructed. "I'll check the building for supplies." Tessa nodded, her small hands gripping his uniform. Elias moved through the corridors carefully. Broken furniture and debris were scattered everywhere. He found a small stash of rations left by someone who had lived here before. There was also a first aid kit. He returned to Tessa with water and bandages. "Let's clean those cuts," he said. She winced as he gently cleaned the blood and dirt from her skin. but she did not resist. Elias worked carefully, doing his best to ease her pain. When he finished, he offered her a sip of water and a piece of dried ration. "Good girl," he said softly. "You're very brave." For the first time, Tessa allowed herself a small smile. It was fleeting, but Elias caught it. He knew that in a world like this, even a small smile was a victory. As night fell, Elias kept watch. He had made a decision. He could not leave Tessa behind. The Zeoraxians would not stop searching for her, and she had no one else. She had become his responsibility, and he would not fail her. Sleep was impossible. Every sound in the city kept him alert. At one point, he heard the distant hum of a Zeoraxian patrol ship. His heart sank. They were close, and he had to act fast. He whispered to Tessa, "We have to move. Stay close to me and don't make a sound." He carried her back into the streets under the cover of darkness. Every step was dangerous. Debris and ruined buildings hid threats, but they also provided some cover. He moved with precision, his military training guiding every action. He had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. A child's life was now in his hands. Hours later, they reached the edge of the city. In the distance, the landscape opened to a forest. Elias paused, taking a moment to look around. The forest could provide cover, but it was also full of unknown dangers. Still, it was better than staying in the ruins. He set Tessa down gently. "We're going to move through the forest. You can walk a little, but stay close." Tessa nodded and clung to his hand. Elias led her into the trees. The shadows were deep, but he could see well enough to avoid obstacles. Every sound made him tense. A snapping branch, a distant cry. Anything could mean they were being followed. After what felt like hours, they found a small clearing near a stream. Elias decided this would be their temporary safe spot. He helped Tessa drink some water from the stream, careful to make sure it was safe. Then he set up a small shelter using debris and branches. It was not much, but it would protect them from the elements for the night. Sitting beside Tessa, Elias allowed himself a moment to breathe. He looked at the child in the firelight. Her face pale but determined. Despite everything she had endured, there was a spark of life in her eyes. She reminded him of why humans fought so hard for survival, for compassion, for hope. "You're safe here for now," he whispered. "I promise I won't let anything happen to you." Quote, Tessa's eyes closed slowly. Exhaustion had taken over, but there was a sense of relief in her posture. Elias kept watch, knowing that the danger was far from over. The Zeoraxians would not give up easily, and this act of mercy had changed the balance of the fight. In that moment, Elias realized something important. War was not just about battles or strategy. It was about choices. Choosing to protect, to care, to act with humanity even in the face of death. This child had reminded him of what it meant to be human. Outside the clearing, the wind carried faint sounds of movement. Elias tensed, scanning the shadows. He knew they were not alone, but he also knew he would not abandon Tessa. Whatever came next, he would face it. Because protecting life, even the life of an enemy's child, was more than duty, it was honor. As night deepened, Elias sat close to Tessa, keeping watch. He felt the weight of the galaxy pressing in, but also a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. He had survived countless battles, but nothing had mattered more than this small life in his arms. In a war that seemed endless, this was a spark of hope, and in that hope, Elias knew one truth. He would fight to the last breath to keep this child safe, no matter the cost. The forest was dark, but Elias moved with confidence, guiding Tessa through the undergrowth. Her small hand clutched his tightly, and every now and then, she stumbled over roots or uneven ground. Elias would bend down, lift her gently, and encourage her to keep going. Despite her exhaustion, she never complained. It amazed him how resilient children could be, even in the face of such terror. The further they went from the ruined city, the quieter the world became. The air smelled of wet earth and growing plants, a sharp contrast to the smoke and ash they had left behind. For the first time in hours, Elias allowed himself a moment to breathe, but he knew better than to relax completely. The Xeraxians would be searching relentlessly. A child could not be hidden easily, and he had just made himself their target by rescuing her. "Why are they looking for me?" Tessa asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at him with wide, fearful eyes. "They are your people," Elias said gently. "They want to bring you back, but I don't think it's safe for you with them right now." Tessa's small fingers tightened around his. They killed my father," she said, voice trembling. "And my mother. She will come." Elias felt a pang in his chest. He had expected fear, but hearing the child speak of loss in such innocent terms made it painfully real. "I know," he said softly. "That's why I'm here. I won't let anyone hurt you." Tessa clung to him, drawing strength from his words, and together they pushed forward into the deeper forest. Birds stirred in the branches above, and occasionally, the distant roar of unknown creatures reminded them that the forest itself was alive with danger. Yet Elias found a strange comfort in the natural world. Unlike the city, here there was life, even if it was wild and untamed. As they moved, Elias began to think about their next step. They needed a safe place to hide, somewhere the Xeraxians would not expect. He remembered a small human outpost that had been abandoned after the initial invasion. It was off the main paths, hidden by hills and thick vegetation. It would be risky to reach, but it was their best chance. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower in the sky, and shadows stretched long across the forest floor. Elias stopped occasionally to check the map he had memorized, making sure they were still on course. Tessa walked silently beside him, her trust growing slowly. She had started to ask fewer questions, instead focusing on keeping up with his pace. Elias noticed that she occasionally glanced back toward the city, a flicker of longing in her eyes. He knew she was thinking of her mother, of the life she had been torn from. "We're almost there," Elias said softly, trying to reassure her. Just a little further. They reached the outskirts of the outpost as night began to fall. The building was in ruins, but it offered enough cover for them to rest. Elias led Tessa inside carefully. The interior smelled of damp wood and mold, but it was dry, and the walls provided shelter. He set up a makeshift bed for Tessa, with old blankets and cushions he found scattered around. "Sleep now," he said gently. "I'll keep watch." Tessa nodded and curled up, her small body shivering slightly. Elias sat near the doorway, his weapon close at hand, eyes scanning the darkened forest. Even in this temporary safety, he could not let his guard down. Hours passed slowly. Elias's mind raced with thoughts of strategy. He knew the Xeraxians would not give up easily. Queen Xerath, the child's mother, was known for her relentless pursuit of what she wanted. Elias understood that he had become an enemy not only of her people but also of someone who would stop at nothing to reclaim her daughter. The weight of that realization pressed heavily on him, but it also strengthened his resolve. When morning came, Elias woke to find Tessa sitting up, rubbing her eyes. "Did they come?" she asked nervously. "No," Elias said, smiling faintly. "We're safe. For now." Tessa hesitated before asking the question that weighed on her small mind. "Will my mother hurt you?" Elias shook his head. "I don't think she will if she knows I'm keeping you safe. But we have to be careful. She's strong and clever." Tessa seemed to understand. She reached out and took his hand again, a silent promise that she would follow him wherever he led. The following days were a delicate balance of movement and rest. Elias taught Tessa to stay quiet, to listen for danger, and to trust her instincts. He also shared stories of humanity, of courage and hope, trying to instill in her a sense of confidence that life could be better than fear and war. Tessa responded slowly, sometimes smiling at his words, sometimes retreating into silence. But Elias could see the spark of life returning to her. One afternoon, while they were gathering water from a nearby stream, Elias noticed the first sign of pursuit. Small footprints in the mud, too small to belong to him, but moving steadily in their direction. He froze, studying them carefully. "Someone's following us," he whispered. Tessa clutched his arm. "What do we do?" "We hide," he said calmly. "Stay close to me, and don't make a sound." They retreated to a small cluster of rocks near the stream, where the foliage was thick. Elias held his breath as he watched the trail. Soon, 2 Xeraxian scouts appeared, moving cautiously through the forest. Elias's pulse quickened, but he remained still, blending into the shadows. He could feel Tessa's tiny body pressing against his side, her fear mirrored in every shallow breath. The scouts passed by without noticing them. Elias waited until they were gone before moving again. "It's okay," he said softly. "They didn't see us. We're safe." Tessa nodded but didn't speak. Elias knew that the fear she carried was more than just for herself, it was for her family, for everything she had lost. He wanted to tell her that life could be better, that not all people were enemies, but he also knew that words could not erase grief. Instead, he offered presence, protection, and hope. As they continued, Elias reflected on the larger picture. Humans were often underestimated by other species. They did not have the advanced technology of the Xeraxians, but they had something more powerful: determination, resilience, and a willingness to fight for what was right. That determination had carried him through countless battles and would carry them both now. By evening, they reached the outskirts of the human outpost. It was a fragile structure, made of metal panels and reinforced wood. But it offered shelter and a chance to regroup. Elias checked the perimeter carefully, making sure there were no Xeraxian scouts nearby. Satisfied, he led Tessa inside. Inside the outpost, Elias allowed Tessa to explore a little. She touched the walls, ran her hands over old furniture, and finally smiled. It was the first time he had seen her genuinely happy. For a moment, the war outside seemed distant, but Elias knew better than to let his guard down. The Xeraxians would find them eventually, and when they did, he would have to be ready. That night, Elias kept watch again while Tessa slept. He thought about the child's mother, Queen Xerath. He had heard stories from other soldiers about her cunning and ruthlessness. She would stop at nothing to get Tessa back. Elias understood that his act of mercy had made him an enemy. He would need every skill, every ounce of courage, to protect the child he had rescued. As the wind rustled through the trees outside, Elias made a silent promise. He would not let the Xeraxians take Tessa. He would fight with all he had, not for glory or honor, but for the life of a child who had trusted him completely. Sleep eventually came, brief and shallow, but it allowed him to face the next day with renewed focus. Elias knew that the path ahead would be dangerous, filled with challenges he could not yet imagine, but he also knew something else. He was not alone. He had Tessa, and he had the human spirit that refused to give up, no matter the odds. The first rays of sunlight filtered into the outpost the next morning. Elias stirred, ready for whatever the day would bring. He looked down at Tessa, sleeping peacefully, and felt a surge of determination. The Xeraxians would come, and he would be ready. Because protecting life, choosing mercy in a world of war, and standing against impossible odds, that was what it meant to be human. And Elias Drake would live up to that truth, no matter what dangers lay ahead. Elias woke with the first light of dawn creeping through the cracks in the walls of the outpost. The forest outside was still, but he knew better than to think the Xeraxians had given up. Every moment of peace was a fleeting one. The time for hiding was over. They had already been here too long. Tessa was still asleep on the makeshift bed he had made for her, her small body curled into a tight ball beneath the blankets. Elias watched her for a moment, her innocent face soft in sleep, and felt a pang of guilt. She should never have been dragged into this war. She had done nothing wrong. But now, her fate was tied to his actions. If he hadn't rescued her, the Xeraxians would have taken her by now, and he couldn't bear to think of what they might have done to her. He stood and moved quietly to the window, peering through the broken glass to the outside world. The forest was quiet, too quiet. The absence of sound set his nerves on edge. He scanned the tree line, looking for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. For now, they were safe. Elias knew that would change soon. The Xeraxians would not stop until they had Tessa back, and he wasn't naive enough to believe they wouldn't come for him with everything they had. He had seen the way they fought, ruthless and efficient, and their queen, Zareth, would not rest until her daughter was returned to her. His thoughts were interrupted when he heard a faint sound behind him. He turned to find Tessa standing by the bed, her eyes wide with fear. She had woken up and noticed his absence. "Are we leaving?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Elias smiled gently, walking over to her and crouching down to her level. "Not yet, Tessa. We're just getting ready. We need to keep moving, but we can't rush." She nodded but still looked anxious. Elias could see it in her eyes, the fear, the uncertainty, the way she had learned to live with constant danger. It broke his heart, but he didn't show it. He needed to stay strong for her. He took her hand and led her to the small makeshift table, where he had gathered what little supplies they had. They had some water, a few rations, and the first aid kit, but not much else. Elias knew they needed to find a more secure location soon. The Xeraxians would be getting closer, and staying in the same place for too long was dangerous. "Listen, Tessa," Elias said, his voice steady. "We're going to keep moving, but I need you to trust me. Okay? I won't let anything happen to you." Tessa looked up at him, her eyes full of doubt but also a hint of hope. She nodded again. "I trust you." Elias gave her a small, encouraging smile and packed their things quickly. He couldn't afford to waste time. They had to keep moving. The journey through the forest was slow and cautious. Elias kept his senses alert, constantly scanning the trees for any signs of danger. He knew the Xeraxians had superior technology, and they would likely have scouts or drones patrolling the area. If they were close, they would find him eventually. He just had to make sure that when they did, he was ready. After several hours of walking, Elias stopped to rest by a small stream. He allowed Tessa to drink, and then they both sat down on a large rock, trying to catch their breath. Elias's mind was racing, thinking about their next move. He had one option in mind. He knew of a human colony on the far side of the planet. It was isolated, hidden in a valley that the Xeraxians had never bothered to check. If he could get Tessa there, they would be safe. But the journey was far, and the threat of being hunted by the Xeraxians was ever present. Elias looked down at Tessa, who was watching the water flow quietly. Her face was still sad, but there was a glimmer of something else, now something that hadn't been there before. She was starting to trust him, and that was all he could ask for. "We'll get to the colony," Elias said, his voice firm, "and once we're there, you'll be safe. No one will hurt you again." Tessa looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "You promise?" Elias nodded. "I promise." But deep down, he knew that promises in this galaxy were fragile things. He had made promises before to his comrades, to his family, and each time, they had been tested by the harsh reality of war. The Xeraxians were not an enemy that could be beaten easily, and Zareth was not a queen who would let go of what she considered hers. That night, they set up camp in a small cave they found, hidden by thick trees and rocks. Elias took the first watch, keeping his weapon ready, eyes scanning the perimeter. He didn't sleep much, but he needed to stay alert. The quiet of the forest was unnerving. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves in the wind and the occasional cry of distant creatures. As he sat there, thinking, Elias felt a strange pull of guilt. Tessa had lost everything. Her home, her family, and yet, here she was, trusting him to protect her, to guide her through this nightmare. Elias had fought in battles, led missions, and faced countless dangers, but nothing had felt as heavy as this. He wasn't just fighting for survival, he was fighting for a child's future, for the chance to give her something better than what the galaxy had become. The next day, they continued their journey, moving through the dense forest and heading toward the colony. Elias was determined to keep his promise to Tessa, no matter the cost. As the day wore on, however, his instincts began to flare. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The forest had grown quieter, and the usual sounds of wildlife had faded. Elias's heart rate increased as he scanned the area. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, he heard the unmistakable sound of a vehicle's engines in the distance. The Zeoraxians were close. They had found them. "Run, Tessa!" Elias shouted, grabbing her hand and pulling her into a sprint. They ducked and weaved through the trees, their breath heavy in their chests. The sound of the engine grew louder. Elias knew they didn't have much time. They couldn't outrun the Zeoraxians, not with the kind of tech they had. Behind them, the first of the Zeoraxian patrols appeared, their armored soldiers crashing through the underbrush. Elias pulled Tessa into a small hollow beneath a cluster of bushes, pressing her close to the ground. He held his breath, hoping they wouldn't be seen. The Zeoraxians passed by, their sharp eyes scanning the area. Elias's pulse pounded in his ears. He knew they were dangerously close to being caught. If they were spotted now, there would be no escape. He held Tessa tightly, willing her to stay still. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the patrol moved on, disappearing into the trees. Elias exhaled in relief, his chest tight with tension. "That was too close," he whispered. Tessa's voice came out shakily. "Are they going to find us?" "They won't," Elias said, though his own words felt uncertain. "Not if we keep moving." But even as he spoke, Elias knew the truth. The Zeoraxians wouldn't stop. They would never stop. And eventually, they would catch up. He looked down at Tessa, her wide eyes staring up at him. She was scared, terrified even, but she was still alive. And as long as she was alive, Elias would fight to protect her, no matter the cost. They had been moving for hours now, but the Zeoraxians were closing in. He could feel it. There was no more hiding, no more running. The time to fight was coming, and when it came, Elias would face the enemy head-on, with Tessa at his side, because this was no longer just about survival. It was about giving her a future, and he would do whatever it took to ensure she had one. The forest was eerily silent as Elias crouched behind a thick tree trunk, his breath steady but his pulse quickening. Tessa huddled next to him, her small body trembling slightly. He had heard the Zeoraxian patrols closing in, their presence a constant threat as they moved deeper into the forest. Elias knew they were getting closer to the colony, but the risk of encountering more Zeoraxian forces was growing with each passing moment. The stakes had never been higher. The Zeoraxians had clearly intensified their search. Elias had expected them to eventually send in reinforcements, but the force moving through the forest now was larger than anything he had encountered so far. They were methodical, sweeping through the trees, making sure no trail went unnoticed. He knew they wouldn't stop until they had Tessa. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. Every choice he made, every step he took, carried the potential for disaster. But there was no turning back now. "We can't stay here," Elias whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "We need to keep moving, Tessa." The young girl nodded silently, clutching his hand tightly as they moved swiftly and quietly. Elias had planned for this moment, the moment when they could no longer hide in the shadows. He knew the Zeoraxians had advanced technology and overwhelming numbers, but they did not know the terrain like he did. This was his advantage. He had grown up on the edge of war, and he had learned to use everything around him to his advantage. They moved quickly but cautiously, staying low and weaving through the dense trees. Elias kept an eye on the sky, knowing that the Zeoraxian airships were always on the lookout. The battle was not just on the ground, it was in the air. And if they were spotted from above, there would be no escape. Hours passed, and the chase continued. They pushed deeper into the forest, finally reaching a narrow ravine that marked the boundary of the colony's territory. Elias had no idea if the humans had spotted the Zeoraxian forces yet, but he wasn't taking any chances. He had to get Tessa to safety. even if it meant risking everything. As they approached the ravine, Elias heard the unmistakable hum of an approaching Xeraxian patrol. His heart skipped a beat. They were so close now. Just a few hundred meters away, he had to make a decision. And quickly. The colony was within reach, but the Xeraxians were closing in. "Stay here," Elias instructed, his voice firm. "I'll scout ahead and make sure it's safe." Tessa looked up at him, her eyes filled with fear, but she nodded obediently. She trusted him. Elias could see the fear in her eyes. But there was also something else, a glimmer of hope. She believed in him, and that was all the strength he needed. He moved quickly, staying low and using the natural cover of the ravine to his advantage. Elias moved silently through the underbrush, his mind racing. The Xeraxians would never expect someone to approach from this direction. The ravine offered him the perfect opportunity to strike quickly and quietly. As he neared the edge of the colony's territory, Elias saw the first signs of human resistance guards patrolling the perimeter, keeping watch over the area. His heart lifted. The colony was secure. For now. But the Xeraxians were getting closer. Elias knew time was running out. He signaled to the guards, who immediately spotted him. They were ready for a fight. "Elias!" one of them called out, recognition and relief in his voice. "You made it! What's going on?" "The Xeraxians. We don't have much time," Elias interrupted. "They're on our heels. I've got a child with me and we need cover. Can you get us inside?" The guard nodded, his face hardening. "Follow me. We'll get you to safety." Elias hurried back to Tessa, who was anxiously waiting by the ravine. Her eyes brightened when she saw the guards. She knew they were close to safety now. But the danger wasn't over. They still had to make it inside the colony's walls before the Xeraxians found them. The guards led them through the dense forest toward the colony's outer gate, a small, camouflaged entrance hidden from view. The Xeraxians could not have known it was here. Elias could feel the tension building in his chest as they approached the gate. But then, the ground shook beneath them. A loud explosion echoed through the forest, and a flash of light cut through the trees. Elias instinctively pulled Tessa closer, shielding her from the blast. The Xeraxians had found them. "Move," Elias shouted. "Get inside." Now, the guards opened the gate just as more explosions rang out in the distance. The Xeraxians were already attacking. They had breached the perimeter. Elias pushed Tessa ahead, urging her to run as fast as she could. He followed closely behind, his hand gripping his weapon tightly, ready for the fight ahead. They reached the entrance just as another explosion rocked the ground. The force sent them stumbling forward. But Elias kept his footing. They were almost inside. The guards quickly shut the gate behind them, sealing it just in time. Tessa was safe, for now. The colony was a small, tightly knit community, hidden deep within the ravine. It had been built by survivors of the early stages of the war, and it had remained off the Xeraxian radar. But Elias knew that wouldn't last long. The Xeraxians were relentless, and their queen, Zareth, would never stop until she had her daughter back. "We're safe for now," one of the guards said, his voice breathless. "But we can't hold them off forever." "We've not." Elias nodded, his mind already working. They needed to fortify the colony's defenses and prepare for the inevitable attack. "How many fighters do we have?" he asked, turning to the guard. "About 20, the guard replied. "It's not much, but we're well prepared. We can make a stand." Elias's mind raced. The Xeraxians were coming, and they would come with everything they had. But they had one advantage. The humans weren't fighting alone anymore. Elias had brought a symbol of hope with him, a child who had witnessed the brutal reality of war but had survived because of human kindness and mercy. "We need to make sure she's safe first," Elias said, turning to Tessa. She had already started to ask questions about the fighting, her curiosity evident despite the fear in her eyes. "Stay close to me," Elias said softly, kneeling to look her in the eye. "I'll make sure nothing happens to you. You've been through too much already." Tessa nodded, but Elias could see the question in her eyes. Could the humans really stand against the Zeoraxians? Could they win? I won't let them take you, Elias promised again. The sounds of battle echoed from outside the gate as the first wave of Zeoraxian forces arrived. Elias turned to the guard, his face grim. Prepare for the worst. They made their way to the colony's central command post, where the rest of the fighters were gathering. Elias knew they had no time to waste. The battle would be fierce, but they could not afford to lose. As the first shots were fired, Elias gripped his weapon tightly and stood tall. The humans were small in number, but they had something the Zeoraxians did not. A fire to protect what they loved. And that was a fire that could not be extinguished. The battle raged on outside the gates. Elias fought with everything he had, protecting Tessa and the colony from the advancing Zeoraxians. For hours, they held the line, pushing back wave after wave of attackers. But Elias knew that this fight was far from over. The Zeoraxians would not give up. And when Queen Zareth arrived, the true test of their resolve would begin. But as Elias looked at Tessa, he knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened next, they had already won. They had shown the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated, that the will to survive and protect others was stronger than any weapon. And in that moment, Elias realized that this was what it meant to be human, to fight, to protect, and to never give up, even when the odds were stacked against you.